Good morning, everybody. My name is Caitlin Odom,
I'm Alicia Oaklesby.
and we are with Dream Home Properties out of Madison, Mississippi.
Thank you for joining us for our video summer series. We're really excited. Today we are here interviewing an appraiser. His name is Shelton Bounds. Shelton, thank you for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank y'all for asking me.
Well, we thought it was important that buyers understand the whole process, and we were breaking it down, and a big part of the process is an appraisal. And so we just thought, inviting you to tell us more about what an actual appraisal is.
Sure. I think first and foremost, the most important thing buyers need to know is that an appraisal, by definition, is an opinion of value. So, a lot of times in the industry, you go into a home, you speak to an owner, and they say, well, the last guy that came out got a certain size or a certain value. If you send 5 of us out, you're going to get 5 different sizes, values, opinions of condition, etc. But it's generalized through the industry and the forms that we use to kind of bring everybody together, regardless of the fact that it is ultimately an opinion. Lenders typically, in order to, guarantee the money, they need to know that the value's there up front. That's where we come in. And in a market like Madison, Hines, Rankin, or the Jackson Metro, as we like to call it, it's pretty standardized. There's not any kind of major commercial or external influences that just drastically impact properties. You can go into most neighborhoods in the area and know that there's been enough sales or active listings to suggest that if I ask a certain amount, I'm probably going to fall somewhere around here. The appraisal is impacted by many factors like supply and demand. Number one, the less houses there are available. Sometimes the more marketable your house is, it doesn't always mean that your appraisal will get there, but it means that you can start a little higher. I tell folks all the time, sometimes you can appraise a house for a lot more than you can actually get because of inventory. If the market's flooded, there might be some sales that would suggest a higher price, but because there's 10 other houses just like it available, you can't always get that number. Sometimes because of no inventory at all, which is something we find here, especially in that $200,000 price range in the city, you might not be able to get an appraisal as high as you could actually sell the house for. And some people don't understand that, and at the end of the day, we're not out to get the owner, but we still have standards to follow that suggest that the house is worth what we're saying, and the facts don't lie. So it's always a good idea. I tell builders and listing agents, up front, let us measure your house before you put it on the listing, because in this market, let's just say, this is a very low average, but at $100 a foot, if you're missing 50 feet, you just missed $5,000 on the list price, which pays a portion of a real estate commission. So it's always a good idea, number one, to know exactly how big the house is. The measuring standards which we follow are ANSI, or ANSI as we call it, and they have standards for counting stairwells upstairs. They have standards for sloped walls and ceiling heights and things like that. So a lot of times, pre-2010, we didn't include stairwells upstairs square footage, but we did include all of the space, whether it was 6 feet, 7 foot ceiling heights and sloped ceilings. So now after 2010, there's a limit of 5 foot rise minimum before we start deducting square footage, but at the same time we add the stairwell into the second floor now. So what owners are finding is that their houses are actually growing a little bit. If they haven't had a measure since 2010, they're always happy about that. But at the end of the day, we are, if the numbers are there, they're there, and if they're not, they're not. It's never anything personal, I guess I would say. I feel like sometimes the owners are on our sides or completely against us, depending on where we come in at. So anyway, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and for buyers, especially in a multiple offer situation, this protects you. It makes sure that the house is worth what you're paying for it. A lot of people worry, well, if I pay this much, am I going to get my money back? If you say it's worth that much, then that's how much the house is worth. You don't have to worry about it anymore.
That's exactly right. Sometimes, especially in a low inventory market like we have, well, depending on price range, it's funny how many $500,000 houses are available and how few, $175,000 houses are available. But a lot of times, if this is just my opinion, but I think if you talk to a lot of us, we'll tell you that if we're within, what people need to know is a lot of times agents will say, or homeowners will say, well, it's funny that the appraisal came in exactly at contract price.
Mm-hmm.
What people don't think about, that I would love for people to know, is that you have to understand that if you've got a listing agent who's a knowledgeable real estate agent in this market, and you've got a buying agent, that listing agent has pulled comps and checked market data and has listed it at a price that they think it may sometimes a little bit higher than probably market value, but they anticipate a lower offer and probably meeting somewhere in the middle. And at the same time, if you have a represented buyer, they see the market and they go to this agent and say, hey, well, here's our comps, and the listing agent says, well, here's why we are where we are. And at some point, it only makes sense that contract price, purchase price, is about what it should appraise for, because two knowledgeable parties came together and created that purchase price. So
Right.
some people say, well, it's weird that it came in at contract price, but it's really not that weird. That's sort of how it should be. If we're $1,000 away from a contract price, with 3 or 4 or 5 comparables, we're pretty much all over it. But a lot of times, if you're 5 or 10 over contract price, and the appraisal comes in 5 or 10 less, it's not because the house, is in bad shape or because we were out to get anybody. It's simply because the numbers weren't there.
Right.
There's no exact all right, 3 comparable perfect sales means this number exactly. It's a case by case basis, and all the houses, as much as they are built similarly around here, floor plan, street frontage, etc., can impact marketability. The house next door has great landscaping and it sells for 5 over, but you can't always just give plus 5,000 to landscaping. So there's a lot of subjective gut feel, I guess. If you've been around long enough, you just kind of know.
The only other questions I've gotten in the past from sellers is, do appraisers normally just look within the neighborhood, or why don't they look outside the neighborhood? Can you explain how
Sure,
that works?
that's a great question. All right, so there's a few differences between a conventional loan and an FHA loan. FHA typically likes to have at least one comparable inside the neighborhood, one comparable outside, and your third can be from anywhere.
Okay.
Conventional loans are a little bit more lenient. We're not as evasive in our inspections. It's very surface. But at the same time, ideally, you would like to be able to pull at least 2 from inside the neighborhood, because there may be a neighborhood, for instance, on the west side of the interstate in Madison, you've got a lot of neighborhoods where one may have a lake, one may have a golf course. Some people view that as equal. Some people can't swim. Some people don't play golf. Some people, that's all they do, So it just depends. But ultimately, at the end of the day, your best market data, especially in a very fluid market like we have, is inside the neighborhood. It's a lot of homeowners like to say, well, I know a guy across the street sold for this much, but there's a guy in the neighborhood down the road that got 10,000 more. Well, you come to find out, the neighborhood down the road has a really nice neighborhood pool, very well landscaped and very well managed, and there's a reason for that. So you can't really say, well, I know somebody's going to come and pay me that, because it's not true. They're paying that over there, and they went there when there's active listings here too.
Right.
And they chose apples to apples. So it's kind of relative to each report. If you have enough market data in the neighborhood, your best bet is to try to stay within the neighborhood. Not to say that we can't go outside, to answer your question. We can, but when you start pricing, an inferior home with a superior home outside of the subdivision, it's going to become pretty obvious when you get into the appraisal and you go, I've got 3 or 4 sales on the street suggesting 100 a foot, but I can go outside the neighborhood and get 110 a foot, but it's because
Right.
an external factor that made that neighborhood more appealing.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Does.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's been a question that many of my sellers ask
get
when
that a
we're
lot,
going
too.
to price it. So
Sure.
of course they just need to call you first.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just get it done, professionally in front of the appraiser. Of course, we have the multiple listing service that helps us, but again, we're doing our best to get those numbers, but you are the true professional that can get the total.
Well, thank you. I'm a realtor as well. I don't sell very many houses a year, but having a double major, as I like to call it, allows me to really put into perspective like where the listing agent was coming from on price, where the buyers are coming from on the offer, and understand, this is pretty common. They want the fridge, they want a home warranty, they want X amount in closing costs. You can go through any other house in the neighborhood that's in MLS and see very similar things that happen. So, again, we're in a very consistent market in that home prices increase. We're kind of in that up and to the right and have been for a long time. And there's enough market data and turnover to be on point a lot more often than not.
Right.
You get out in the rural areas and it gets a little more difficult to say, hey, guy down the road sold and got this, and they're not always the same. But anyway, I'm always glad to help, and I'm with Shelton Bounds Realty Partners. We're on Main Street. We've been there about 30 years, in between the railroad tracks and the red caboose. Best way to say it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank
Yeah, and
you.
if y'all have more questions for Shelton, just leave them in the comments and he can answer those, or if you have questions for us, leave them in the comments. Stay tuned for our next video, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.